I pulled into the driveway and saw my business partner Rick Phelan's red F-150 parked where my truck usually sits. The magnetic company sign was off the door. I checked the hallway thermostat. 72 degrees. The furnace my wife Janine said was broken ran fine. I heard voices coming from the basement I built with my own hands. I opened the security app on my phone, scrolled back through the footage. 6 months of Tuesdays. Same time, same truck. If this story hooks you, hit subscribe and tell me your country in the comments. It means the world to me. My name is Curt Stavros. I'm 48 years old, and until last Tuesday I thought I knew exactly what my life was. HVAC, business co-owner, husband of 19 years, father to a 16-year-old son named Danny, amateur beekeeper with 2 hives in the backyard. I was wrong. But before I get to what I did after I saw those recordings, I need to go back. Back to who I was, before Janine, before Rick, before the business, before the system I built turned against me. Because what happened in that hallway, standing there reading 72 degrees on the thermostat, while my wife and my business partner did whatever they were doing in my basement, that didn't come from nowhere. It came from 26 years of building a life. One board, one wire, one handshake at a time. And to understand what I did next, you need to understand what I built. My father Dimitri dropped dead of a heart attack in the back of our family appliance repair shop on Wayne Avenue when I was 22. Wednesday afternoon, 3 o'clock. He was replacing a condenser fan motor in a Kenmore refrigerator, and his heart just stopped. The paramedics said he was gone before he hit the floor. My mother Lois called me from the shop phone. She didn't cry. She said, "Curt, your father is dead. Come now." That was it. Greek women from that generation didn't fall apart in public. She fell apart later at home where no one could see. I held her on the kitchen floor for 40 minutes while she shook without making a sound. I'd been planning to finish my mechanical engineering degree at Wright State. Had 2 years left, good grades, a path that made sense. I dropped the enrollment paperwork on my advisor's desk the following Monday and took a job installing commercial security systems for a company called Sentinel Protection Services. The pay was decent, the work was steady, and my mother needed me earning, not studying. 4 years at Sentinel. I wired cameras and access panels into warehouses, office buildings, and retail stores across the Dayton Metro. Ran conduit through drop ceilings, mounted IP cameras on loading docks, configured network video recorders in server closets that smelled like dust and warm plastic. I learned how systems talk to each other, how to build redundancy so that if one camera fails, the others still cover the blind spot, how motion detection algorithms separate a person from a shadow, how cloud backup works, how encryption protects footage, how timestamps create a record that can't be argued with. Most people don't think about security systems until they need one. I thought about them the way some men think about engines or guitars. How the pieces fit, how information flows, how you build something that watches and remembers without anyone noticing it's there. At 26, I pivoted to HVAC work. Better money, more demand, and I had the mechanical instincts my father had passed down through 16 years of watching him take apart appliances and put them back together. Within a month, I was diagnosing compressor failures other guys missed, reading airflow patterns the way my dad read refrigerant pressures, talking to furnaces the way he talked to washing machines. My father used to say, "The furnace tells you everything if you listen." Clicking means one thing. Humming means another. Silence is the worst. Silence means something already broke and you missed it. I met Rick Phelan on a commercial job at a catering office park. He was running the front office for a mid-sized HVAC outfit, coordinating schedules and vendor orders while the technicians did installations. Rick was all handshake and backslap. The kind of guy who remembered your kid's name, your wife's birthday, your favorite beer. He'd walk onto a job site, and within 10 minutes, every contractor was laughing and calling him by his first name. His one genuine interest was Civil War history. He could talk about Antietam and Pickett's Charge with a depth that didn't match anything else about him. He spotted what I could do before most people did. Watched me diagnose a rooftop unit that 3 other techs had written off as needing full replacement. I found a cracked heat exchanger hiding behind a failed limit switch. Saved the client $11,000. Rick bought me a beer that night and said, "Curt, you're the best tech I've ever seen, and you're making somebody else rich." Within 2 years, he had a proposal. His words, sitting across from me at a Waffle House booth on Route 35 at 7 in the morning. Coffee going cold between us. Semis rattling the windows. "I'll handle the office, the clients, the books. You handle the work." We split everything 50-50. I should have asked more questions. I should have insisted on dual signatory authority from day one. I should have hired an independent accountant to audit the books quarterly. But I was 28. My mother needed a co-signer for the SBA loan, and Rick's confidence was the thing he sold best. He made it sound simple because simple was his product. My mother, Lois, co-signed the $180,000 SBA loan. She read every page of the 12-page partnership agreement before she signed it, running her finger along each clause while Rick shifted in his chair and checked his phone. Page 7 had a fiduciary responsibility clause. Either partner or the loan co-signer could trigger a forced buyout if the other partner committed financial malfeasance. Rick signed it in blue ink, witnessed and notarized, without reading that page twice. Lois did. Stavros and Phelan Heating and Cooling opened in a modest industrial unit off Route 35. I handled fieldwork, installations, and crew management. Rick handled the office, client acquisition, and bookkeeping. He asked for sole signatory authority on the company's Fifth Third Bank operating account, so he could handle payroll and vendor payments without calling me off a job site. Made sense at the time. I was crawling through attics and wiring thermostats 12 hours a day. I didn't want to drive across town to sign a check for copper fittings, so I gave it to him. Sole signatory, full access, the keys to everything I was building. I married Janine when I was 29. She was 27, the middle daughter from a family in suburban Columbus. Her older sister was a nurse. Her younger sister was finishing dental school. Janine worked as a receptionist at a dental office on Wilmington Pike. Our first date, she looked at my calloused hands across the table and said, "Either you work construction or you're the world's worst hand model." I laughed harder than I had in months. She reorganized our wedding seating chart 3 times and made it better each round. After years of boyfriends who canceled plans and borrowed money and disappeared for weekends, she wanted someone who showed up. I showed up, every time, for everything, without being asked. The first decade was good. Not movie good, but real good. Danny was born when I was 32. Janine cut back to 3 days a week at the dental office to be home with him. I worked longer hours to cover the gap. The business grew. 3 employees became 5, then 8. We hired Phil Dietrich, a 20-year HVAC veteran with hands like shovels and an opinion about everything. Phil became my senior installer, the guy I trusted to run a crew when I couldn't be on site. He grumbled about Rick's schedule from day one. Never said anything directly. Just a look, a grunt, a shake of the head when Rick ducked out early for a client lunch that ran 3 hours. We bought the house in Centerville. 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet cul-de-sac. The kind of street where people wave from riding mowers and kids leave bikes in the yard. I built it out myself over the years. New deck. Replaced all the windows. Remodeled the kitchen. Built the basement into a workshop over 3 summers. Tongue and groove cedar paneling. I fitted myself. A workbench I bolted to the floor. Pegboard walls of hand tools organized by function. Mounted vise. Space heater, because the main ductwork didn't extend fully below grade. I spent more hours in that basement than in any room in the house. I installed a 6-camera security system using my old Sentinel skills. 2 exterior cameras covering the front door and driveway. 2 in the basement workshop. 1 in the garage. 1 watching the back patio and my beehives. The system ran around the clock, with motion-triggered recording, cloud backup on a rolling 12-month window, and a phone app that gave me live feeds and archived footage from anywhere. I configured it the same way I'd configured dozens of commercial systems. Redundant power, encrypted storage, automatic overwrite at 12 months. Nobody in the household paid attention to any of it. The cameras were just another thing Curt installed, like the water heater or the deck railing. 1.2 million in annual revenue. 8 employees. A full shop. Steady commercial contracts alongside residential work. I reviewed the quarterly profit and loss statements Rick put together, but trusted the monthly numbers he presented. The books looked clean. Revenue was up. Expenses were reasonable. Margins were healthy. Rick had a way of presenting the numbers that made everything feel good. He'd slide the printout across the conference table and say, "Another strong quarter, brother." This is what happens when 2 guys trust each other. I trusted him. The beekeeping started almost by accident. A swarm landed on the fence post behind our house one spring afternoon, and instead of calling pest control, I spent 3 hours on YouTube learning how to capture and hive it. Janine thought I was losing my mind. Danny, 9 years old at the time, stood next to me in a borrowed veil and watched every move I made. That first colony survived the winter, and the next spring, I bought a second hive box and split the colony. 2 hives in the backyard. I read beekeeping journals the way other men read sports stats. The biology of the colony fascinated me. Every bee with a role, no wasted motion. The foragers, the nurses, the guard bees, the queen laying 2,000 eggs a day. Drones that don't contribute get expelled before winter. Workers that carry disease get isolated. The system is ruthless and fair in equal measure. Every fall I'd harvest the honey. Mason jars of clover and wildflower, labeled by hand with the hive and harvest date. I gave them to clients, to neighbors, to Phil and the crew. People loved the jars. Not because the honey was special, but because they knew I'd done it myself, start to finish, the same way I ran ductwork and wired thermostats. The right way, because there was no other way that made sense to me. Danny grew up in the shop. Saturdays and summers, he'd ride along on service calls. By 12, he could identify a capacitor by its rating. By 14, he was wiring thermostats under my supervision. He didn't talk much on those drives. Neither did I. We'd listen to the radio, eat gas station sandwiches, and work side by side in attics and crawl spaces where the only conversation was, "Hand me the 10mm. One afternoon at a veterinary clinic in Beaver Creek, he traced a short in the control board before I did. Didn't say a word about it. Just handed me the multimeter with the reading already on the screen. When Danny was born, I opened a College Advantage 529 plan through Ohio's savings program and started contributing $300 every month from my business distributions. I never missed a payment. 16 years, $300 a month, compounding. I tracked the balance on a spreadsheet Lois helped me set up. The plan was simple. Danny would graduate high school with enough in the account to cover 4 years at a state university without loans. I'd done the math. $300 a month for 18 years, at average market returns, would put the account near $120,000. I worked 60-hour weeks during heating season, took emergency calls at 2 in the morning, crawled through attics in July when the temperature hit 140 degrees at the ridge, replaced furnaces on Christmas Eve because a family with 3 kids had no heat. I didn't complain about any of it. Janine stopped noticing what it cost me around year 10. Not all at once. The way a compressor loses efficiency, 1% per season, until the system can't keep up. She stopped asking about my day, stopped waiting up when I had late calls, stopped mentioning the things I'd built or fixed or maintained around the house. The deck I spent 4 weekends on became just the deck. The kitchen remodel became just the kitchen. The $300 monthly deposit into Danny's future became just another line item she scrolled past on the bank app. I noticed. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. She started talking about Melissa from the dental office, who'd left her husband and reinvented herself. She started spending Tuesdays on projects that seemed to expand to fill the entire day. Pinterest boards of holiday tablescapes, her climate-controlled closet of labeled decoration bins, 14 for Halloween alone, color-coded and inventoried on a spreadsheet that got more attention than her household budget. She'd spend hours arranging foam tombstones and fake cobwebs on the front lawn while I ran service calls until dark. I suggested counseling once, over dinner. She looked at me like I'd proposed selling the house. "We're fine," she said. "We're just in a phase." Fine. A phase. She didn't want to hear the clicking. Rick, meanwhile, was Rick. He still landed contracts with his backslapping and his Bengals talk and his way of making every client feel like the most important person in the room. He still showed up to the office in his polo shirts and khakis, with that chunky watch he'd bought himself as a business milestone gift. He still called me brother and grabbed me coffees from the Keurig and told me we were building something special. But the balance was off. It had always been off. I just didn't want to see it. Rick's contribution to the company was his mouth. My contribution was everything else. The installations, the diagnostics, the crew training, the emergency calls, the reputation that kept clients coming back. Customers asked for Curt Stavros by name. They tolerated Rick Phelan because he answered the phone. I gave Rick sole signatory authority because I trusted him. I reviewed quarterly reports instead of monthly bank statements because I trusted him. I let him manage the QuickBooks account, process the vendor invoices, handle the expense reimbursements, and reconcile the books. I trusted him, the same trust that made me a target. My mother saw it, not the affair, not the money, but the architecture of vulnerability I'd built around myself. She came over for Sunday dinner one evening, watched Janine scroll her phone through the entire meal while I talked to Danny about a compressor we'd replaced that morning. After Janine went upstairs, Lois stood at the kitchen sink drying dishes and said something I filed away without acting on. "Your wife lives in your house like a guest, Curt. She eats the food, she uses the rooms, but she doesn't carry anything. Guests don't carry." I told her she was reading too much into it. That marriage was work, and Janine and I were in a lull, and it would come back around. Lois set the dish towel on the counter and looked at me with the same expression she'd worn the day she read page 7 of the partnership agreement. I didn't ask what she meant by that look. I should have. That was 3 years before I came home on a Tuesday to fix a furnace that wasn't broken. 3 years of Lois keeping that document in the fireproof safe, remembering every clause. 3 years of me working 60-hour weeks, contributing $300 a month to Danny's college fund, giving honey jars to neighbors, and trusting the 2 people closest to me to do the same. About 3 years before, I found that red F150 in my driveway, Phil Dietrich was leaning against the parts counter at the shop with a clipboard in his hand. "Your boy Rick's got another one of those Tuesday vendor meetings. 3rd one, this month. You ever seen a vendor at one of those meetings?" "He handles the client side," I said. Phil grunted. "Client side. Right. I had the Hendersons calling in with no heat and couldn't reach him for 2 hours. His phone goes straight to voicemail every Tuesday after 1 o'clock. I filed it. The same way I filed my mother's comment about guests. The same way I filed Janine's new habit of dropping Rick's name into conversations with a familiarity that didn't match casual acquaintance. Rick was saying the other day, "Rick thinks we should. Clicking means one thing. Humming means another. Silence is the worst." I heard the clicking. I just wasn't ready to diagnose the system yet. But I remembered what my father taught me. Before you open the panel, before you touch a single wire, you listen, you watch. You let the system tell you what's wrong. And you don't start the repair until you understand the full scope of the failure. I was listening. I didn't know it yet, but I'd been listening for years. And the system I'd installed in my own house, the 6 cameras running day and night, backing up to encrypted cloud storage on a 12-month window, was listening too. The erosion didn't start with Rick Phelan in my basement. It started the way most failures start, 1 degree at a time, until the whole system is running outside spec and nobody notices because it still turns on. Janine worked 3 days a week at the dental office on Wilmington Pike. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8:30 to 4. Tuesdays and Thursdays were her days off. She'd earned them, she said, by working full-time through Danny's first 6 years before cutting back. Fair enough. I never questioned the arrangement. What Janine did with those Tuesdays shifted over the years. When Danny was young, she spent them at the park, at playdates, at pediatric appointments. As he got older and started school, the Tuesdays opened up. The projects I'd already cataloged in my mind, the Pinterest boards, the 14 Halloween bins, Gerald the skeleton. Those were just the visible layer. Underneath was a woman with 2 empty days a week and a husband who came home smelling like attic insulation and duct sealant. I see that now. I didn't see it then. We didn't fight. That was the problem. Fighting would have meant we still cared enough to argue about the gap between us. Instead, we orbited the same house on different schedules, passing each other in the kitchen with the practiced choreography of roommates who've memorized each other's patterns. She made coffee before I woke up. I took out the trash before she asked. Danny moved between us like a shuttle diplomat, talking to each of us separately about things he could have said at the dinner table if we'd all been sitting there at the same time. Janine told people we were fine. She used the same word she'd used with me, fine. The word did a lot of work in our marriage. She told Tammy at the dental office. She told her sister in Columbus. She told the neighbors at the 4th of July block party where I grilled burgers for 40 people, and she arranged the dessert table with the precision of a wedding planner. Everyone said what a great team we were. Curt does the heavy lifting, Janine does the details. A perfect match. She told me through her sighs when I mentioned a weekend service call, through how fast she scrolled past the 529 deposit notifications. She stopped touching my arm when she passed me in the hallway. I didn't notice it was gone for months, only recognizing the absence when I tried to remember the last time she'd done it. I should have asked, but Stavros men built things instead of saying things, and I'd never learned a different language. Janine, the middle daughter who'd spent her life almost, but not quite getting the crown, wanted to be seen. The homecoming court nominee who'd mentioned it more often than a grown woman should. Close to the crown, but never wearing it. A pattern she carried into adulthood without examining it. The company Christmas party was 7 months before I came home to find Rick's truck in the driveway. We rented a hall off Wilmington Pike, nothing fancy. Paper tablecloths. AJ who played too much country. A buffet from a catering company that put out the same aluminum pans at every event in Dayton. I wore a button-down shirt Janine had picked out. She wore a green dress I hadn't seen before, fitted in a way her usual clothes weren't. She'd gotten her hair done that morning. Highlights. Blown out. $140 to look effortless. I noticed. Didn't say anything. Should have said something. Phil Dietrich and his wife sat with us for the first hour. Phil complained about a new EPA regulation on refrigerants. His wife talked to Janine about their daughter's volleyball season. Normal, comfortable. The kind of evening that holds no surprises. Then my phone buzzed. Commercial client. A medical office in Beaver Creek with a failed heat pump on their server room unit. Servers overheating. Data at risk. The kind of call you don't ignore at 9 on a December evening. I stood up from the table and told Janine I had to go. She didn't protest, didn't ask how long I'd be, just nodded and said, "Drive safe." I drove safe, fixed the heat pump, replaced a faulty contactor, and topped off the refrigerant. Left the medical office at 11:15, invoiced the call the next morning, and never thought about what happened at the party after I left. What happened was Rick. I didn't learn the specifics until later, after the security footage made the timeline irrelevant compared to the pattern. But here's what I pieced together from fragments. After I left the Christmas party, Rick danced with Janine. He told her she looked incredible. He told her I didn't know how lucky I was. He told her a woman like her deserved to feel special. The same script he used on everyone. But Rick's talent was making the script feel like it was written just for you. He looked at you when he talked. He remembered what you'd said 3 conversations ago. He laughed at things that weren't funny because the laughter made you feel like he'd said something worth hearing. Janine hadn't felt heard in years. The affair began the following Tuesday. Rick blocked his office calendar from 1 to 5 for a vendor meeting. No vendor was contacted. No meeting was scheduled. His red F-150 pulled into my driveway at 12:50 that afternoon. By 1:15, the basement motion sensor had triggered its first recording. I was on a rooftop in Huber Heights, replacing a condensing unit for a church that needed heat before Sunday services, 3 miles up and a world away from what was happening in the room I'd built. The routine settled in fast. Every Tuesday, same window. Rick left the office after lunch with his calendar blocked and his phone off. Janine had the house to herself. Danny was at school until 3:30. I was on job sites until 5 or 6. The window was wide open, and they walked through it like a door they'd always known was there. They used the basement. My basement. The workshop I'd built over 3 summers. The cedar paneling I'd tongue and grooved while Danny handed me finished nails. The workbench I'd bolted to the floor and leveled with steel shims. The pegboard walls where every tool hung in its place, arranged by function. They never used the bedroom, never the living room, never the guest room. Always the basement. Maybe it felt separate from the marriage. Maybe the distance from the main floor made it feel like a different house. Maybe they just liked the privacy. I built that room. Every surface they touched, I'd measured, cut, and fastened myself. While the affair ran its weekly schedule, something else was happening at the office. Rick's skimming had started years earlier as rounding up expense reports. A $20 lunch claimed as $35. A mileage reimbursement padded by 40 miles. The amounts grew the way his confidence grew. Incremental. Testing. Pushing the boundary a little further each month to see if anyone noticed. Nobody noticed. Because nobody was checking. The method was simple. We ordered materials and equipment from 3 main vendors, Carrier, Lennox, and Train. Each shipment came with an invoice. Rick entered the invoices into QuickBooks. But before he entered them, he added to them. $100 here. $200 there. $300 on the bigger orders. The inflated amounts went into the company books. The real amounts went to the vendors. The difference came back to Rick as expense reimbursements he processed and approved himself. $2,000 to $3,000 a month. $24,000 to $36,000 a year. Money that should have gone into the business, into equipment upgrades, into raises for Phil and the crew, into the distributions that funded my mortgage payments and Danny's college fund. Instead, it went into Rick's personal checking account at Fifth Third Bank, and from there into a PNC bank account I didn't know existed. A joint checking account my business partner opened with my wife. Funded by money he stole from the business I ran. The signs were there. I see them now, the way you see a leak stain on a ceiling after the pipe has already burst. Janine started spending differently. Not extravagantly, nothing that would trigger alarm bells in a household where I handled the major bills, and she managed the day-to-day. But the texture changed. New handbags that weren't designer, but weren't cheap either. Acrylic nails every 2 weeks when she used to do them monthly. Gold jewelry, she said, came from a clearance sale at Macy's. A pair of boots that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. I noticed the spending the way I noticed everything about the house. Quietly. Without comment. I assumed she was treating herself. Dental receptionist money, plus the household allowance I transferred monthly. She'd earned the right to buy boots. She got brighter at social functions. More animated. She laughed louder at neighborhood cookouts. She flirted with a confidence that didn't match the woman who'd spent 3 years telling me she felt invisible. Something had changed in her chemistry, a charge that hadn't been there before, and I attributed it to Janine shaking whatever restlessness had been making her unhappy. Good for her, I thought. She's found something that makes her feel alive. I just didn't know that something was my business partner. She started saying his name at dinner with Danny. Rick was saying the other day that the Bengals might actually make the playoffs. On a Saturday when I came home from a service call, Rick thinks we should look into upgrading the office software. While loading the dishwasher on a Sunday night, I ran into Rick at Kroger. He said, to tell you, the Henderson estimate is ready. Rick at Kroger. On a Sunday. When Rick lived 15 minutes in the other direction and shopped at Myher. Phil's earlier comment about the Tuesday vendor meetings sat in the back of my mind. Not his suspicion. Not yet. More like the sound a furnace makes when it's cycling too often. A pattern that doesn't match the expected performance. You hear it, you note it, but you don't pull the panel off until you've ruled out simpler explanations. Maybe Rick was meeting clients off-site. Maybe he had personal appointments he didn't want to discuss. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. The same benefit I'd given him for 11 years. The same benefit that had cost me sole signatory authority, financial oversight, and now, though I didn't know it yet, $68,400. The brazenness was its own cover. A company truck at a co-owner's house. Business. Normal. The cover story wrote itself. Rick's F-150 with the Stavros and Phelan logo on the door, parked in the same driveway every Tuesday for 6 months. In broad daylight. On a cul-de-sac where people wave from riding mowers. It was so obvious, it was invisible. 26 Tuesdays. While Rick blocked his calendar and turned off his phone, Phil ran the shop. While Janine texted me about grocery lists and Danny's dentist appointments, she was clearing the kitchen counter and walking to the basement stairs. While I diagnosed heating systems and wired control boards and crawled through attics, the two people I trusted most in my professional and personal life were in the room I built, spending the money I earned, on a schedule so predictable it could have been a standing appointment in a shared calendar. The financial damage accumulated alongside the personal damage. Danny's $529 college savings plan, 16 years of $300 monthly contributions, should have been on track for the $120,000 I'd projected. But my business distributions, the owner's draw I took from the company account, had been systematically reduced by Rick's skimming. Less money in the company meant less money available for distributions. Less distributions meant less going into Danny's account. The gap grew by a few $100s a month, then 1,000, then more. By the time I discovered the truth, the $529 was $30,000 short of where it should have been. Rick Phelan was stealing from my son's future. And my wife's name was on the account where the money landed. Danny worked with me on weekends through all of this. He rode shotgun in the service truck, ate gas station sandwiches, wired thermostats under my supervision. He called Rick Uncle Rick and meant it. At the company barbecue that summer, Rick put his arm around Danny's shoulder and said to a client, "This kid's going to be running the whole operation someday." Chip off the old block. Danny beamed. I flipped a burger and nodded. Good kid. Good partner. That's what I saw. 6 weeks later, Rick drove to my house on a Tuesday, parked in my driveway, walked past the security camera I'd installed above the front door, went down the stairs I'd framed and drywalled, and continued the affair in the room where Danny and I had built a birdhouse the previous winter. The birdhouse was still on the workbench, waiting for paint. I didn't know any of this yet, but the system knew. 6 cameras, running around the clock, motion-triggered, cloud-backed, encrypted. Every Tuesday afternoon, the driveway camera recorded Rick's F-150 pulling in. The basement cameras recorded movement. The system time-stamped everything, filed it, backed it up, and held it in storage for 90 days before the rolling window overwrote the oldest files. The cameras didn't judge. They didn't gossip. They didn't look the other way, because confrontation was uncomfortable. They just recorded what happened, frame by frame, Tuesday by Tuesday, building a record with the same patience I'd used to build the house around them. Every hive has guard bees. They sit at the entrance and check the scent of every insect that tries to come through. If the scent doesn't match the colony, the intruder gets removed. My cameras were my guard bees. I just hadn't checked the entrance yet. Janine grew careless. 6 months without consequence will do that. She stopped hiding the PNC bank notifications on her phone. She left the screen unlocked on the kitchen counter while she cooked dinner, the bank app minimized but not closed. She wore a bracelet I'd never seen and didn't bother inventing a story about where it came from. When I asked, she said, "Oh, this? I've had this forever." She hadn't. I'd built the jewelry box on her dresser. I knew every piece in it. I let it go. That was the currency of our marriage in its final year. Small lies I accepted because the cost of questioning them was higher than the cost of believing them. A colony that loses its queen keeps working for days before the workers realize she's gone. The routine holds even after the center of it is dead. You don't notice until you open the hive and find no new brood, no eggs, no future. Just workers going through motions that no longer produce anything. Phil Dietrich kept grumbling. He didn't know about the affair, didn't know about the money. He was just a working man, annoyed that his boss's partner kept disappearing on the busiest afternoon of the week. I followed up on one of those Tuesday vendor meetings, Phil told me one afternoon while we loaded copper pipe into the truck at the Route 35 shop. Called the vendor. They hadn't seen Rick in 6 months. I stopped loading. Which vendor? Carrier rep. The one Rick said he's been meeting with about the commercial pricing tiers. Phil closed the tailgate. There are no pricing tier meetings. There never were. I stood there with a length of 3/4-inch copper in my hand and said nothing. Phil looked at me. 15 years of working together had given him the right to look at me like that, like a man watching someone walk toward a hole in the floor. "Just thought you should know," he said. I drove to the Henderson house and replaced their zone valve, fixed the water damage estimate, called Janine on the way home and asked what she wanted for dinner. She said she didn't care. I picked up Chinese from the place on Far Hills that Danny liked. We ate at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, and talked about Danny's chemistry test and whether the Bengals had a shot at the wild card. Normal. Domestic. A family having dinner in a house the father built, eating food the father paid for, while the mother's phone buzzed twice with notifications she cleared without reading. 6 months of Tuesdays passed this way. The money kept draining. The affair kept running. Danny kept saving for a college fund that fell further behind with every doctored invoice Rick entered into QuickBooks. Janine kept telling Tammy at work that she and Curt were fine, just busy. Rick kept calling me brother, and buying me coffees from the Keurig and presenting quarterly reports with numbers that looked clean because he'd made sure they did. And the cameras kept recording. Patient, precise. Every frame time-stamped. Every Tuesday, archived. A system built by a man who understood how information flows, how you create redundancy, how you build something that watches and remembers without anyone noticing it's there. The clicking had been there for months. I heard it the way you hear a compressor cycling at 2 in the morning, half awake, registering the sound, but not the meaning. Phil's call to the carrier rep, Janine's bracelet, Rick's name in her mouth at dinner, the Tuesday calendar blocks, the spending that didn't match the income, the energy she brought to cookouts that she no longer brought to our kitchen. Every one of those sounds was a diagnostic. Every one of them was telling me the same thing. The system had been running outside spec for years. I just kept turning up the thermostat instead of opening the panel. Tuesday morning, early October. The kind of Dayton morning where the temperature drops 20 degrees overnight and every furnace that sat dormant for 6 months tries to kick on at the same time. Every HVAC company in the metro starts running double shifts. I was on a commercial install at a strip mall in Beaver Creek. New rooftop package unit for a veterinary clinic that was expanding into the adjacent suite. Phil Dietrich and 2 of my younger guys were handling the ductwork tie-ins while I supervised the electrical connections on the roof. Wind was gusting hard enough to turn loose sheet metal into a safety hazard, and I had my hands full, keeping the installation on schedule for a Friday inspection. My phone buzzed at 9:14. Janine. Text message. Furnace isn't kicking on. House is freezing. Reasonable text. October in Dayton, the first real cold snap. A 15-year-old gas furnace that had been running since we bought the house. I'd been meaning to replace the ignition module last spring, but pushed it to fall because the cooling season kept us busy. The timing tracked. I climbed down from the roof and found Phil at the service truck, sorting copper fittings by size. I need to run home. Janine says the furnace is down. Phil looked up from the fitting tray. Want me to send one of the guys? No. It's probably the ignition module. I've got a spare in the garage. Won't take long, Phil nodded. Tuesday was a slow day on the commercial side. The crew could handle the Beaver Creek install without me for a couple hours. I grabbed my keys and drove west toward Centerville, running diagnostics in my head the way I'd done 10,000 times. If the furnace wasn't igniting, it was the hot surface igniter, the flame sensor, or the control board. The igniter was the most common failure point on a unit that age. 5-minute fix. I had a universal replacement in my toolbox at home. 20 minutes on Route 35, then south on Far Hills, then the quiet residential turns into Centerville. Leaf blowers running somewhere down the block. A school bus pulling away from the corner. The neighborhood in its mid-morning lull. Most driveways empty, most houses locked up with people at work or school. I turned onto the cul-de-sac. Rick's red F150 was in my driveway, parked where my truck usually sat, nose out, like he'd pulled in planning for a quick exit. The magnetic Stavros and feline door sign was off. Rick only removed the company logo for personal errands. He didn't want clients spotting his truck at the grocery store or the bar and thinking the business was closed. My first thought was not suspicion. My first thought was, Rick's here to fix the furnace. Janine texted him, or he heard about it through some channel I missed, and he came out to take a look. Rick wasn't a technician, couldn't diagnose a flame sensor from a thermocouple, but he'd watched me work enough times to think he could fake it. That was Rick. Always inserting himself into situations where his presence wasn't needed, but his credit could be claimed. I parked on the street, 2 houses down. I didn't think about why. Later, I realized my body had already decided something my mind hadn't caught up with yet. Walked up the sidewalk. Front door was unlocked. I stepped inside, and the first thing that hit me was the temperature. Warm. Not the struggling warmth of a furnace cycling on and off. Full, steady warmth. The kind of heat that means the system has been running for hours without interruption. The hallway thermostat is a Honeywell programmable unit I installed 7 years ago. White plastic housing, backlit digital display, mounted at eye level on the wall between the living room and the kitchen. I read it the way I read every thermostat. Automatic. The number registered before the implications did. 72 degrees. The furnace was running fine. Had been running fine all morning. The house wasn't cold. The furnace wasn't broken. Janine's text was a lie, and the lie had brought me home on a Tuesday afternoon to find my business partner's truck in my driveway with the company logo removed. I stood in the hallway. The house was quiet, the way houses are when the occupants think they're alone. No television, no radio, no footsteps on the main level. Just the low hum of the furnace, doing what furnaces do, and the refrigerator cycling in the kitchen. Then voices, from below, the basement, muffled by the floor and the insulation I'd packed between the joists, but audible if you stood still and listened the way my father taught me. 2 voices. One, I'd listened to across the dinner table for 19 years. The other I'd listened to across the conference table for 11. Rick laughed, that too loud backslapping laugh that filled every room he walked into. Coming through the floor of my own house, from the workshop I'd built over 3 summers, through the cedar paneling I'd tongue and grooved while Danny handed me finished nails. What I did next is the thing people don't believe when I tell them. They expect rage. A man hearing his wife and his business partner in his own basement should kick the door in, throw punches, scream until the neighbors call the police. That's what happens in the version of this story where the protagonist is a different kind of man. I am not that man. I stood in the hallway with my boots on the hardwood I'd refinished, my hand resting on the wall I'd painted, and I did nothing. I didn't move toward the basement door. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even clench my fists. Something dropped inside me. Not into my stomach. Deeper, into the foundation. Not anger. Not yet. Something structural. Load-bearing. My phone was in my back pocket. I pulled it out and opened the security app. The familiar grid appeared on the 4-inch screen. 6 thumbnail previews, each one showing a live feed from one of the cameras. Front door, driveway, basement east, basement west, garage, back patio. I tapped the driveway camera first. Rick's F150 parked at the angle I'd seen from the street. Timestamp in the corner, 11:47 a.m., October 7th. I didn't need the live feed to confirm what was in my driveway. I needed the archive. The app organized footage by date with motion-detected events flagged in red for easy review. I scrolled back to the previous Tuesday, September 30th. Motion event flagged at 12:51 p.m. Rick's red F150 pulling into the driveway. The magnetic sign already removed. Rick climbing out of the cab in a polo shirt, no clipboard, no tools, no vendor catalogs. Walking to the front door. I checked the Tuesday before that. September 23rd. Same pattern, different arrival time by 18 minutes. Same departure window. I'd seen enough on the small screen. The pattern was there. But I needed the full archive, and I needed it on hardware I controlled. Below me, the voices continued. The muffled conversation I could no longer pretend not to understand. Whatever they were saying didn't matter. The words were irrelevant. The footage said everything. The words never would. I closed the app, put the phone in my pocket, walked to the front door, opened it without hurrying, stepped outside into the October air, and pulled the door shut behind me with the same care I used when leaving a commercial site after hours. Quiet, controlled, no trace that I'd been there. I drove back to Beaver Creek. 17 minutes on Route 35. Hands at 10 and 2, radio off, windows up. The strip mall parking lot was half full. Phil's truck was in the same spot. The rooftop unit was taking shape, the crew working the ductwork connections I'd laid out before I left. Phil saw me climbing the ladder and called up from the ground level. Furnace? Ignition module. Cleaned it up, should hold, until I can replace it this weekend. First lie I'd told Phil in 15 years of working together. I finished the commercial install, supervised the final connections, checked the refrigerant charge and the airflow readings, signed the work order, did paperwork in the truck while the crew packed up tools, drove to the Route 35 office and filed the day's invoices. Normal, routine. A Tuesday like every other Tuesday, except for the part where my life split into two halves and I was the only one who knew it. 5:30. I drove home. The cul-de-sac was quiet. Driveways filling with cars as the neighborhood came home from work. Rick's F150 was gone. The driveway was empty except for Janine's Honda. The front door was locked. Inside, the house smelled like garlic and onions. Janine was in the kitchen, hair pulled back, apron on, stirring something on the stove. Danny was at the kitchen table with a chemistry textbook and a calculator. "Hey," Janine said without turning around. "Did you fix the furnace?" "Yeah, it's running fine." "Good. It was freezing this morning. I had to put on two sweaters. In a house that was 72 degrees at 11:47. I let the lie pass the way I'd let 100 smaller lies pass over the past year. Not because I believed it, because responding to it would have shown my hand before I was ready to play it. We ate spaghetti at the kitchen table. Janine talked about a coworker's daughter who'd gotten into Ohio State early admission. I talked about the Beaver Creek install and the ductwork modifications we'd made to accommodate the clinic expansion. Normal conversation in a normal house on a normal Tuesday evening. Janine's phone buzzed twice during dinner. She glanced at the screen both times, cleared the notifications without reading them, and set the phone face down on the table. A habit she'd developed in the past 6 months that I'd cataloged but never commented on. After dinner, I helped Danny with molar mass conversions for 45 minutes. The kid had a good head for numbers when someone walked him through the logic. He didn't need tricks or shortcuts. He needed someone to show him the system and let him work through it. Same way I'd taught him to wire a thermostat. Same way my father taught me to listen to a furnace. Janine went upstairs at 9. Shower running. Bedroom door closing. Television on low in the master bedroom. The sound of a show she watched while scrolling her phone until she fell asleep. Danny finished his homework and went to his room at 9:30. I went to the garage. The garage workshop was smaller than the basement workshop. A metal workbench along one wall. A pegboard with automotive tools. A chest freezer Janine used for bulk grocery runs, and the network video recorder mounted on a shelf above the electrical panel. The NVR was a 4-bay unit running 2 mirrored hard drives, recording all 6 cameras and syncing with the cloud backup service every 4 hours. I'd installed it 3 years ago when I upgraded from the original Sentinel-era system. The interface was web-based, accessible from any browser, but the local drives held higher resolution footage than the cloud-compressed versions. I sat on a stool at the metal workbench and plugged in an encrypted external hard drive I kept in my rolling toolbox. 2 terabytes. I'd bought it for backing up client installation records and invoicing data. Never used more than 40 gigabytes. It had plenty of room for what I needed. I opened the NVR interface on my laptop and navigated to the archived footage. The system stored 12 months of continuous recording locally at full resolution, with motion events flagged and indexed by camera and date. I started with the oldest Tuesday in the archive, 6 months back, mid-April. The driveway camera, April 8th. Motion event at 1:07 p.m. Rick's red F150 pulling in. I selected the clip and initiated the transfer to the external drive. While it copied, I opened the corresponding basement camera feeds. East camera, motion at 1:22 p.m. West camera, motion at 1:24 p.m. Both transferred. I moved to the next Tuesday. April 15th, same pattern. Different arrival time by 12 minutes. Same departure window. Same basement triggers. Transferred. I worked through the archive the way I worked through a commercial installation. Systematic. No steps skipped. Each Tuesday got its own folder on the external drive, labeled by date. Inside each folder, driveway arrival, front door entry, basement east, basement west, driveway departure. 5 clips per Tuesday. 26 Tuesdays. 130 video files, each one time-stamped and verified against the NVR's internal clock. While the files transferred, I opened a spreadsheet on the laptop. Dates in column A, arrival times in column B, basement trigger times in column C, departure times in column D. Column E, notes. The arrival times varied by 30 minutes in either direction. The departures clustered between 4:30 and 5. The basement cameras triggered every single time, 14 to 22 minutes after the driveway camera recorded his arrival. The gap accounted for the walk from the truck to the front door to the basement stairs. 14 minutes if they didn't talk first. 22 if they did. I cross-referenced each Tuesday against the company's shared Google Calendar, which I could access from my management account. Every single Tuesday showed the same entry on Rick's calendar. Vendor meeting, 1005 p.m. I pulled the vendor contact logs from our QuickBooks account. Carrier, Lennox, Train. None of them had a meeting, call, or site visit with Rick Phelan on any Tuesday in the past 6 months. The vendor meetings were fiction, calendar entries designed to create a cover story for a 4-hour absence that happened 26 times in a row. I added one more item, the text message from that morning, 9:14 a.m. Furnace isn't kicking on, house is freezing. I screenshotted it and dropped it in the October 7th folder. The text that brought me home. The lie that cracked the system open. By 4 in the morning, the archive was complete. 26 Tuesdays of time-stamped video. 26 corresponding calendar blocks. Vendor contact logs confirming no meetings occurred. The text message. The thermostat reading of 72 degrees captured by the basement east camera's wide-angle view, which included the hallway thermostat at the top of the basement stairs. 2 copies. One on the encrypted external drive. One on a secondary backup under the false bottom of my rolling toolbox, a compartment I'd built for warranty documents. I cleared the browser history on the laptop, logged out of the NVR interface, and unplugged the external drive. The garage was cold. October air leaking through the weather stripping I kept meaning to replace. I sat on the stool for a while, looking at the toolbox where the drive was hidden. 130 video files, a spreadsheet, calendar screenshots, vendor logs, a text message, the complete record of a 6-month betrayal, organized by date and cross-referenced against professional schedules, sitting in a steel box on rubber casters between a socket set and a box of wire nuts. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I'd spent 5 hours downloading evidence of my wife sleeping with my business partner in my own house, and the dominant sensation was not grief or rage or humiliation. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when a system you couldn't diagnose finally reveals its failure mode. The clicking that had been bothering you for months turns out to be a cracked heat exchanger, and now that you know what's broken, you can see every symptom that pointed to it all along. Phil's comments about the Tuesday vendor meetings. Janine's new spending habits. The way she said Rick's name at dinner. The bracelet I'd never seen. The phone notifications she cleared without reading. The energy at the cookouts. The sighs when I mentioned Weekend service calls. The slow drift from partnership to cohabitation to something less than roommates. All of it made sense now. Every symptom led to the same diagnosis. I showered, made coffee, put on a clean Carhartt and work boots, packed my lunch the way I packed it every morning. Turkey sandwich, apple, bottle of water. Drove to the Route 35 office at 6:30, an hour before anyone else arrived. I sat at my metal desk in the warehouse bay and drank coffee in the quiet. The shop smelled like always, refrigerant and metal shavings and the faint sweetness of compressor oil. My desk had a calculator, a stack of work orders, and a framed photo of Danny at 12, holding a multimeter on his first ride-along. Phil arrived at 7:15. He dropped his lunch bag on the break table and walked over. Beaver Creek inspection is Friday. We good? We're good. Airflow readings came in clean. Refrigerant charge is at spec. Phil poured himself coffee from the communal pot. Rick coming in today? Don't know, because he owes me the Henderson billing from last week. I've asked 3 times. I'll follow up. Phil grunted and went to prep the service truck. The rest of the crew filtered in over the next half hour. Morning banter, thermos lids, radio on low. Rick arrived at 8:45, Keurig coffee in one hand, phone in the other, talking to someone about a Bengals trade rumor. He walked through the warehouse bay the way he always did, acknowledging the crew with a wave and a morning boys that landed somewhere between boss and fraternity president. He stopped at my desk. Hey, brother. How'd the Beaver Creek thing wrap up? Clean. Inspection Friday. Beautiful. I've got the Henderson follow-up and that new quote for the strip mall on Wilmington. Should be a strong month. He sipped his coffee. Everything good at home? Janine said something about the furnace yesterday. I looked at him, the polo shirt, the chunky watch, the easy smile that had worked on every client, every vendor, every contractor in the Dayton Metro for 11 years. The smile that had worked on my wife. Furnace is fine, I said. Just needed the ignition module cleaned. Rick nodded. Good, good. Hey, I might duck out early today. Got a vendor meeting this afternoon? Sounds productive. Should be. He clapped me on the shoulder. All right. I'll be in the front office if you need me. He walked away. The warehouse door swung shut behind him. Phil was watching from the service truck, a wrench in one hand. He caught my eye. I held his gaze for a second, then looked away. Nobody noticed anything different about me that day. I ran a service call in Kettering, replaced a blower motor in a split system at a dentist's office. Checked the airflow balance on a new install Phil's crew had finished the week before. Called 2 clients about winter maintenance contracts. Normal work on a normal Wednesday. At home that evening, Janine asked about my day. I told her about the blower motor. She told me about a patient at the dental office who'd fainted during a root canal. Danny showed me a chemistry quiz he'd gotten an 87 on. We watched 40 minutes of television. Janine went to bed at 9. Danny at 9:30. I sat in the kitchen alone and thought about bees. A colony infested with wax moths doesn't attack individual moths. It strengthens the hive first, builds up defenses, then expels the invaders from a position of strength. Panic loses colonies. Method saves them. I had the footage. I had the timestamps. I had the calendar proof and the vendor logs and the text message lie that started everything. But footage of an affair was a divorce attorney's weapon. What I already knew about the money was something else entirely. The 47 vendor invoices Rick had entered into QuickBooks over the past year and a half. The expense reimbursements that hit his personal account like clockwork. The PNC bank account I'd seen referenced in a notification on Janine's phone 3 weeks ago. A bank neither of us used, a notification she'd cleared before I could read the full text. Danny's 529 balance that had fallen behind the projections I tracked on a spreadsheet, short by an amount I couldn't explain through market fluctuation alone. I had the evidence of the affair. Now I needed court-admissible proof of the money. The footage proved betrayal. Financial records would prove theft. And I needed both before I opened the panel. The affair was the fire. The money was the accelerant. And I needed to document the full scope of the damage before I started the repair. I had not raised my voice. I had not confronted anyone. I had not made a single move that could be detected. The technician was diagnosing the system before he started the repair. 3 weeks of 2 lives. The visible one ran the same schedule as every week before it. I went to work, ate dinner, checked the beehives, ran weekend service calls with Danny. The invisible one ran underneath, like a second set of ductwork nobody could see. My first call was to a divorce attorney. Not someone I found online or picked from a billboard on Route 35. A guy named Marcus Webb, recommended by Tom Gaffney, who owned a plumbing company in Beaver Creek and had gone through his own divorce 4 years earlier. Tom didn't ask why I needed the name. He wrote it on the back of a business card and handed it to me in the parking lot of a supply house on Woodman Drive. He's good. Tom closed his truck door. Doesn't waste your time. Marcus Webb operated out of a second-floor office on Main Street in downtown Dayton. Wood-paneled walls, law books he'd actually read, a desk covered in manila folders. He was in his mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a handshake that meant business. I sat across from him and laid it out in the same order I'd organize a job estimate. The affair. The security footage. The Tuesday pattern. The business partnership. The money I suspected was being skimmed. Webb listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked 2 questions. Ohio is a one-party consent state for audio recording. You know that? Yes. Security cameras on your own property don't require anyone's consent. The footage is yours. Every frame of it is admissible in court. He leaned back. Now, the money. You said you suspect financial misconduct. Suspect or no? Suspect. Strong enough that I need someone who can confirm it. Then you need a forensic accountant before you need a courtroom. I'll give you a name. The name was Andrea Buckley. Webb called her the best in the Dayton Metro for tracing money that people worked hard to hide. She operated out of a converted Victorian house in the Oregon district, the arts and dining neighborhood south of downtown, where old houses got second lives as boutiques and professional offices. I drove there 2 days later, parking on a side street between a coffee roaster and a used bookstore. Andrea's office was on the first floor. Dual monitors on a standing desk, banker's boxes stacked along one wall, and a whiteboard that covered the entire wall behind her chair. The whiteboard was covered in transaction flow diagrams from another case, colored arrows connecting account numbers with dates and dollar amounts. She'd left it up, either because she was still working the case or because she wanted visitors to see what she was capable of. A portable space heater hummed under her standing desk, filling the room with dry warmth that smelled like old radiators. She was in her late 30s, lean, dark hair pulled into a ponytail, wearing a fitted blazer over a plain t-shirt. No jewelry except a watch. She crossed the room in 4 steps, pulled the chair out, sat down, and opened her laptop before I'd finished taking off my jacket. Marcus says you've got a partner problem and a wife problem, and they're connected. That's right. Sit down. The conference room was small. 4 chairs around a table with coffee rings on the wood veneer. I sat and told her everything I'd told Webb, plus the financial details. The sole signatory authority I'd given Rick on the Fifth Third operating account. The quarterly P&L statements I'd reviewed, but not audited. The vendor invoices I'd never cross-checked against original supplier records. The expense reimbursements Rick processed and approved himself. Andrea listened the way I listened to a furnace. No interruption, no reaction on her face. When I finished, she asked one question. Does your partner have sole signatory authority on the business account? Yes. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise. Recognition. The look of a technician who hears a symptom and already knows the diagnosis. How long? 11 years. She wrote something on a legal pad. I'll need 18 months of bank statements from the operating account. Full QuickBooks access, read only, is fine. And original invoices from your top 3 vendors. Not copies from your books. Originals from the vendors themselves. Carrier, Lennox, and Train. I'll contact them directly. Vendor records are the control sample. Whatever your partner entered into QuickBooks is the test. If the numbers don't match, we've got our answer. I gave her the QuickBooks login credentials. She walked me to the door and said something I didn't expect. Mr. Stavros, I see cases like this twice a month. Business partner, spouse, sometimes both. The ones who come to me early, before they confront anyone, before they tip their hand. Those are the ones who win. You did the right thing by coming here first. I drove back to the Route 35 office and spent the afternoon installing a condenser unit at a dental practice in Oakwood. Rick was in the front office when I got back, feet up on his desk, talking to someone on the phone about a commercial bid. He waved when I walked through. Hey brother, good day? Good day. I went home, made dinner, helped Danny with a lab report. Watched Janine clear 2 phone notifications without reading them. Went to bed at 10. Stared at the ceiling until midnight. Andrea called 9 days later. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I've got the first round of results. I told Phil I had a dentist appointment and drove to the Oregon district at 8:30. Andrea was already in the conference room with her laptop open and the whiteboard wiped clean except for a new diagram she'd drawn in blue and red marker. She didn't waste time. I pulled 18 months of bank statements from the Third operating account. I also obtained original invoices from Carrier, Lennox, and Train for the same period. QuickBooks keeps a complete audit trail. Every entry, every edit, every deletion, time-stamped with the user who made the change. She turned the laptop toward me. The screen showed a side-by-side comparison. Left column, an original Carrier invoice for $3,840. Right column, the same invoice as entered into QuickBooks by Rick Phelan. The QuickBooks entry showed $4,140. $300 difference. That's one. I found 46 more. She opened a spreadsheet. 47 rows. Each one a vendor invoice. Left column, vendor's original amount. Right column, Rick's QuickBooks entry. Third column, the difference. The differences ranged from $80 to $30-$20. Some were round numbers. Some were odd amounts designed to look like legitimate price variations. Total overcharges across 18 months. Andrea pointed to the sum at the bottom of the column. $68,400. I'd suspected the number was bad. Seeing it in a spreadsheet, broken down invoice by invoice, each one traceable to a specific date and a specific keystroke by a specific user, was different from suspecting. This was the system telling me the full scope of the failure, and the scope was worse than the sound had suggested. The method is consistent. He receives the original invoice from the vendor. Before entering it into QuickBooks, he adds between $80 and $320 to the amount. He processes the inflated amount through the operating account, pays the vendor the correct amount, and pockets the difference through expense reimbursements he approves himself. She pointed to the whiteboard diagram. Blue arrows trace the money from the Stavros and Phelan operating account through Rick's personal checking account at Fifth Third. The same way I'd trace ductwork through a building, following the flow from supply to return, looking for where the air was leaking out of the system. The expense reimbursements go to his personal third account. That's where most people would stop looking. But the money doesn't stay there. She drew a red arrow from Rick's personal account to a second box on the whiteboard. Inside the box, she'd written 2 names. The first was Richard Phelan. The second was Curt Stavros. PNC Bank, joint checking account, opened 7 months ago. The red arrow connected my business to my wife through my business partner's personal account. 3 institutions, 3 accounts, 1 pipeline. Doctored invoices at Stavros and Phelan fed Rick's personal account, which fed a shared account with the woman I'd been married to for 19 years. I looked at the whiteboard for a long time. The arrows, the account numbers, the names in the box. Andrea had turned the thing I'd suspected into arithmetic. Clean, verifiable, court-admissible arithmetic. The affair and the theft weren't separate events. They were the same transaction. How did you find the PNC account? Rick's personal third account shows regular transfers to an external account. I subpoenaed the receiving account records through your business attorney's discovery authority. PNC provided the joint account documentation, including the signature cards. She slid a photocopy across the table. Rick's signature on the left, Janine's on the right. Joint holders with full access, opened the same month the affair started. The money Rick steals from your company goes into his personal account, then into this joint account. Your wife has been withdrawing from it for small purchases, but most of the balance is intact. Current balance is approximately $22,000. I picked up the signature card photocopy and looked at Janine's handwriting. The same handwriting that filled out Danny's school forms and wrote grocery lists on Post-it notes stuck to the refrigerator. The same handwriting on a bank document I'd never known existed, opening an account funded by money stolen from the company I built. Andrea waited. She'd done this enough times to know when someone needed a minute. "There's one more thing," she said. She pulled up another spreadsheet, Danny's 529 account. She'd mapped my business distributions against the projected growth of the college fund. Your monthly distributions from Stavros and Phelan have been declining for the past 18 months. Not dramatically. The company appears profitable, so the reduction isn't obvious. But Rick's skimming pulls between $2,000 and $3,000 a month from the operating account. That's money that would otherwise be available for owner distributions. Your distributions have been running 12 to 15% below where they should be. She pointed to a column highlighted in yellow. Your son's 529 plan should hold approximately $120,000 based on 16 years of $300 monthly contributions at average market returns. The actual balance is around $90,000, $30,000 short. The shortfall maps against the reduced distributions caused by the embezzlement. Not dollar for dollar, because distributions are discretionary and market returns fluctuate. But the correlation is strong. An expert witness could testify to causation. $30,000 missing from my son's college fund because my business partner was stealing from the company and funneling the money to my wife. I sat in Andrea's conference room looking at a whiteboard that mapped 26 Tuesdays of security footage against 47 doctored invoices against PNC bank deposits, all falling inside the same 6-month window. The affair, the theft, and my son's diminished future, all connected by red and blue arrows on a dry arrows board in a converted Victorian house. Andrea added one more line to the whiteboard. A number, $68,400. Below it, $30,000. Below that, $98,400. The total cost of trusting the wrong people. I thanked her and drove to my mother's house. Lois lived in a brick ranch in Kettering, 5 minutes from the house where my father died. She kept the house the way she kept everything, clean, organized. nothing wasted. When I knocked, she opened the door, still wearing the apron she used for morning baking. Flour on her hands, the smell of walnut bread from the kitchen. "Sit," she said. Not a request. I sat at the kitchen table while she poured 2 cups of coffee from the percolator she'd used since 1987. She sat across from me and waited. "I need the partnership agreement from the safe." Lois didn't ask why. She set down her coffee, walked to the bedroom, and came back 3 minutes later with a 12-page document in a clear plastic sleeve. The pages were crisp, but not new. She'd handled them enough times to keep them protected. The blue ink on page 12 was Rick's signature, witnessed and notarized 11 years ago. She set the document on the table between us and opened it to page 7. Her finger landed on the fiduciary responsibility clause, the way it had landed there when she'd first read it, running each word before she agreed to co-sign. This is the one. Either partner, or the lone co-signer, can trigger a forced buyout if the other partner commits financial malfeasance. "I know. Tell me what he did," I told her. "The doctored invoices, the expense reimbursements, the PNC account with Janine's name on it, the $68,400, Danny's 529 shortfall." Lois didn't move during any of it. When I finished, she picked up her coffee, took a long sip, and set it down. I never trusted either of them. I just didn't have the proof. She pushed the partnership agreement across the table toward me. "Now you do." I put the document in a manila envelope and drove back toward Dayton. But I didn't go to the office, and I didn't go home. I drove to a coffee shop on East Dorothy Lane, a place with small tables and too much natural light, and I texted a number I'd pulled from the school directory 2 weeks ago and kept in my contacts under a work alias. Meg Phelan, Rick's wife of 15 years. A middle school English teacher at Fairmont who ran the school literary magazine and coached the girls' cross-country team in the fall. I'd met her 100 times at company events, neighborhood cookouts, the annual Christmas party where her husband had danced with my wife. Meg was the kind of woman who asked how your kids were doing and remembered the answer next time. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck and carried herself with a composed dignity that, looking back, had always felt like armor. I texted, "This is Curt Stavros. I need to talk to you about something important. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on East Dorothy Lane after school today?" Her reply came 20 minutes later. 3045. "I'll be there." She arrived at 3:50 in a cardigan and slacks, her school badge still clipped to her lapel. The espresso machine behind the counter hissed and sputtered while she ordered a black coffee without looking at the menu. She sat across from me at a corner table where the afternoon light cut a hard line across the wood. "What's this about?" "No small talk. No warm-up. It's about Rick." Meg wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. I assumed. I pulled out my phone and opened the security app. I'd selected a single clip from the archive. The driveway camera, a Tuesday 3 weeks prior. Rick's F-150 pulling in at 12:47 p.m. Rick walking to the front door. No clipboard, no tools, no company materials. The Stavros and Phelan magnetic sign removed from the door. The footage was 38 seconds long. It told the story without narration. I turned the phone toward Meg and let the clip play. She watched it once. Then she closed her eyes. Not squeezing them shut, not fighting tears. Just closing them the way you close a book you've been reading for too long. A long exhale through her nose. She opened her eyes. How long? 6 months. Every Tuesday. Meg nodded once. The nod of a woman confirming a number she'd already calculated in her own head. She'd known something was wrong. The Tuesday absences. The phone that went to voicemail. The extra showers. The new energy. The small lies that accumulated like dust on a shelf. She hadn't known the specifics. She hadn't needed to. The math was always there. Is there more? He's been stealing from the business. Doctored invoices, expense reimbursements, $68,000 over 18 months. The money goes into a joint bank account he opened with Janine. Meg set her mug down. Her jaw tightened. The composed dignity I'd always admired shifted into something harder. A joint account. With your wife. Yes. She was quiet for a full minute. The coffee shop hummed around us. A barista called out an order. Two women at the next table laughed about something on a phone screen. What are you going to do? I'm going to take the company back. I'm going to divorce Janine. I'm going to recover what he stole. And me? Why did you tell me? Because you deserved to know. And because you'll need your own attorney before this goes public. Meg picked up her coffee and drank. She held the mug with both hands, the same way she'd held it since she sat down. When she set it down, her hands were steady. I'd been waiting for a conversation like this for years, she said. Different version of it, different woman, different details. But this conversation, I knew it was coming. She stood up, pulled her purse strap over her shoulder, straightened her badge. Thank you for telling me yourself. Most men wouldn't have. Most men didn't build the cameras that caught him. Something crossed her face. Not a smile, but close to one. I'll call my attorney tonight. She left the coffee shop at 4:12. I sat at the table for another 10 minutes, finishing my coffee, watching the afternoon traffic on East Dorothy Lane. An ordinary street on an ordinary Wednesday in Dayton, Ohio. People buying groceries, picking up dry cleaning, living their lives without knowing that two marriages and a business partnership were about to come apart in the same week. Over the next 4 days, the case assembled itself with the precision of a commercial installation. Andrea Buckley delivered her final forensic report. 47 altered invoices, $68,400 in documented embezzlement, the PNC joint account trail, and the 529 shortfall analysis. Marcus Webb prepared the divorce filing. A business attorney named Claire Diaz, referred by Webb, reviewed the partnership agreement and confirmed that Lois's co-signer standing gave her the legal authority to trigger the forced buyout under the fiduciary clause on page 7. I had a meeting with Claire in her office on a Thursday afternoon. She'd read Andrea's report and the partnership agreement overnight. The clause is clear, she said. Financial malfeasance by either partner allows the co-signer to initiate a forced buyout. Your mother's signature on the SBA loan gives her standing. The forensic report gives her cause. What does that mean for Rick? His share gets valued based on the company's assets, minus the documented theft. The $68,400 comes off the top. Legal fees and audit costs get assigned to the malfeasant party per the agreement's dispute resolution section. His net payout will be significantly reduced. And if he doesn't agree, then we file a civil lawsuit for embezzlement using Andrea's report as evidence. 47 invoices with side-by-side vendor comparisons. QuickBooks audit trails with his user credentials on every entry. Bank records showing the money flowing from business account to personal account to joint account with your wife's name on it. Claire set down the report. He'll agree. I drove home that evening and checked the beehives. The East Colony was building up stores for winter, the frames heavy with capped honey and packed pollen. The workers moved through the hive with their usual efficiency. No wasted motion. No wasted resources. By the end of the third week, the case was complete. 6 months of time-stamped security footage on an encrypted drive. Andrea Buckley's forensic accounting report with 47 exhibits. The PNC joint account records with both signatures. The partnership agreement with the fiduciary clause and Lois's co-signer standing. Danny's 529 shortfall analysis. Meg Phelan as a corroborating witness. A divorce attorney, a business attorney, and a forensic accountant, all coordinated and ready. Rick had no idea. He was still blocking Tuesdays for vendor meetings that didn't exist. Still entering inflated invoices into QuickBooks with the confidence of a man who believed no one was checking. Still clapping me on the shoulder in the warehouse and calling me brother. On Friday morning, he walked into the shop at his usual 8:45 Keurig coffee in hand and stopped at my desk. "Hey, what do you know about the Fairfield Commons project?" "I've been talking to the property manager. 42 units, full HVAC overhaul. Could be the biggest contract we've ever landed. 42 units. 47 doctored invoices." He was pitching expansion while the foundation was already cracked. "Sounds like a big deal." "It is. We should sit down next week and plan it out. Maybe Tuesday afternoon? I can clear my schedule." "Tuesday works." Rick grinned. "Beautiful. I'll book the conference room." He walked back to the front office, whistling something I didn't recognize. I watched him go, then turned back to the work order on my desk. For residential furnace replacement in Beaver Creek. Standard job. 4 hours, maybe 5. The trap was built. All it needed was Tuesday. I chose the venue the way I chose everything. Same room, same table, different outcome. The conference room at Stavros and Phelan Heating and Cooling. Route 35, Industrial Park. The same room where Rick and I had signed the original partnership papers 11 years ago, where we'd reviewed contracts and shaken hands with clients and built what I thought was a real business between two men who trusted each other. The same table where Rick had slid doctored P&L statements across to me for years, smiling, calling me brother, telling me we were building something special. The table seated 8. I needed 6 chairs. Curt, Rick, Marcus Webb, my divorce attorney, Claire Diaz, the business attorney, Andrea Buckley, the forensic accountant, and one empty chair for the attorney Rick would need to call once he understood what was happening. I set it up on a Monday. Told Rick we needed a Tuesday afternoon meeting about the Fairfield Commons contract expansion. 42 units, full HVAC overhaul. The biggest potential contract in the company's history. Big enough that Rick wouldn't question dedicating his Tuesday to it. Big enough that he'd cancel his standing appointment in my basement. Rick responded the way Rick always responded to money. With excitement and zero suspicion. "Tuesday's perfect. I'll have the property manager's specs printed out. This is the one, Curt. I can feel it." I told Janine I'd be working late. She didn't ask follow-up questions. She hadn't asked follow-up questions in years. Monday evening, I called Marcus Webb and Claire Diaz and confirmed the timeline. 2 o'clock. Both attorneys would arrive early and set up in the conference room before Rick got there. Andrea Buckley would bring her laptop, the forensic report, and the whiteboard presentation she'd spent 2 weeks preparing. I did not tell Rick that anyone else would be in the room. That night, I checked the beehives. The East Colony was heavy with late-season stores, the frames thick with capped honey. The workers moved through the entrance in organized lines, returning from the last goldenrod bloom of the season. No wasted trips. The drones were already gone. I closed the hive, set the mouse guard, and went inside to pack my lunch for the last normal Tuesday of my working life. Tuesday morning, I drove to the Route 35 office at 6:30. Unlocked the warehouse bay. Made coffee in the communal pot. The HVAC system I'd installed when we moved into this building hummed through the ceiling vents. I sat at my metal desk and reviewed Andrea's report one more time. 47 exhibits. $68,400. The PNC signature card with 2 names in the holder's box. Danny's 529 shortfall mapped against reduced distributions. The numbers were clean. The trail was airtight. I'd checked it 4 times. A 5th time wouldn't change anything. Phil Dietrich arrived at 7:15. He dropped his lunch bag on the break table and walked over. "What's the plan today?" I need you to keep the crew in the warehouse bay this afternoon. Inventory check. Whatever you need to call it, just keep everyone close. Phil looked at me for a long time. He didn't ask why. 15 years of working together had taught him to read the difference between routine and something else. How close? Close enough to hear the front office door. Phil nodded once. All right. The morning passed the way mornings passed. Service calls dispatched. Inventory counted. Parts ordered. The crew moved through the warehouse bay with the same rhythm as any other day. I handled the callback on a furnace installation in Beaver Creek, drove there and back, signed the work order, and was sitting at my desk by 1:30. At 1:45, Marcus Webb and Claire Diaz arrived through the warehouse bay entrance, which opened into the back hallway that connected to the conference room without passing through the front office. Andrea Buckley followed 2 minutes later, carrying her laptop bag and a rolled-up sheet of whiteboard paper with the presentation already drawn. I met them in the conference room. The TV was mounted on the wall opposite the door. I'd installed it 2 years ago for client presentations. Today, it would serve a different purpose. Andrea taped her whiteboard paper to the wall beside the TV. Blue and red arrows. Account numbers. Dollar amounts. 2 names in a box labeled PNC. She connected her laptop to the TV with an HDMI cable and opened the first exhibit. Carrier invoice number 2847. Original amount $3,840. QuickBooks entry $4,140. Difference $300. She cycled through 3 more to test the display. The numbers filled the screen in a font large enough to read from across the room. Claire Diaz arranged 3 sets of documents on the table. The partnership agreement opened to page 7. The forensic report. The settlement terms she'd drafted over the weekend. Marcus Webb set his folder at the far end of the table. His documents were for later. For Jeanine. I sat in the chair facing the door. Hands flat on the table. The same table where I'd signed the partnership papers. The same table where Rick had told me, once a quarter for 11 years, that the numbers looked strong. The conference room clock read 1:58. Rick walked in just after 2 in his usual Tuesday polo. The collar crisped and starched, khakis with a crease that looked ironed, his chunky stainless steel watch catching the overhead fluorescence. His F-150 was in the parking lot, freshly washed, the magnetic company sign on the door, because today was official business. He had a Keurig coffee in one hand and a manila folder in the other. He was already talking before he cleared the doorway. All right, Curt, I pulled the Fairfield Commons specs, and I think we should bid aggressive on this one. 42 units, full overhaul. We're talking 6 months of steady work. This is the big one, brother. This is what we've been. He stopped. The folder lowered an inch. His eyes moved from me to the 3 people seated at the conference table. The open folders, the laptop wired to the wall-mounted TV, the whiteboard paper taped to the wall with blue and red arrows connecting boxes. He couldn't read yet from the doorway. His smile held. 3 seconds. 4. Then the corners began to drop. What is this? The words came out at half the volume Rick usually operated at. The room was small enough that half volume was still audible. But the reduction told me everything. Rick Phelan had walked into 1,000 rooms in his life and filled every one of them with his voice. This was the first time a room pushed back. Sit down, Rick. He didn't sit. He looked at Marcus Webb, then at Claire Diaz, then at Andrea Buckley, then back at me. His brain was doing the math. 3 strangers, folders, a presentation, his partner reading him the way a technician reads. A pressure gauge. No expression. Just data. Curt, what's going on? Who are these people? I introduced them. Marcus Webb, my divorce attorney. Claire Diaz, business attorney specializing in partnership. Andrea Buckley, forensic accountant. The Keurig coffee tilted in Rick's hand. A bead of it ran over the rim and hit the carpet. He didn't notice. "Sit down," I said again. Rick sat. He chose the chair farthest from me, closest to the door. His knees hit the table edge. He set the coffee down. The manila folder with the Fairfield Commons specs stayed in his hand like a prop from a play that had been canceled. Andrea took the lead. She stood beside the TV and opened her presentation the way she'd walked me through it in her Oregon district office. No emotion, no inflection, just numbers. "Mr. Phelan, I've conducted a forensic audit of Stavros and Phelan's financial records covering the past 18 months. I obtained original invoices directly from your 3 primary vendors, Carrier, Lennox, and Train. I then compared those originals against the corresponding entries in your QuickBooks system." She clicked to the first exhibit. The split screen filled the TV. Left side, Carrier invoice 2847, $3,840. Right side, QuickBooks entry $4,140. This is one of 47 invoices where the amount entered into QuickBooks exceeds the vendor's original invoice. The differences range from $80 to $320 per invoice. She clicked through 3 more. Lennox, Train, Carrier again. Each one a side-by-side comparison with the discrepancy highlighted in red. The numbers accumulated on the bottom of the screen like a running total on a cash register. Rick's jaw worked. His eyes tracked the exhibits the way a homeowner watches a technician pull a cracked heat exchanger out of a furnace, knowing the bill before the number is spoken. Total documented overcharges across 18 months, $68,400. Andrea moved to the whiteboard paper. She traced the blue arrow from the Stavros and Phelan operating account through Rick's personal Fifth Third account. Rick watched her finger follow the money he'd stolen, dollar by dollar, through the same pipeline he'd built to hide it. The inflated amounts were processed through the company's operating account. You paid the vendors the correct amount and pocketed the difference through expense reimbursements you processed and approved using your sole signatory authority. Then, the red arrow. From Rick's personal account to the PNC box. Andrea's finger stopped on the 2 names inside the box. She didn't need to read them aloud. The TV showed them in 40-point font. Richard Phelan, Janine Stavros. The color left Rick's face, the way pressure leaves a blown line. From the cheeks first, then the forehead, then the neck above the starched polo collar. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Whoa, let's just slow down here," he said. "Okay? Let's all just... There's got to be a misunderstanding. These numbers, I'd have to look at the books myself. There could be accounting variances, vendor discounts that didn't get..." "I'm not done. Sit and listen." 6 words. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The room was small, and the evidence was large, and there was nowhere for Rick to go that the numbers wouldn't follow. Claire Diaz took over. She slid the partnership agreement across the table. Open to page 7. The fiduciary responsibility clause. Rick's signature in blue ink at the bottom of page 12. Witnessed and notarized, 11 years old and legally binding. "Mr. Phelan, this clause provides that either partner or the SBA loan cosigner may trigger a forced buyout upon documented evidence of financial malfeasance by the other partner. Mrs. Lois Stavros, as cosigner on the original loan, has exercised this provision." She placed a second document beside the partnership agreement. A letter from Lois, signed and notarized 2 days earlier, formally triggering the clause. The buyout valuation will be conducted based on an independent audit of the company's current assets, minus the $68,400 in documented embezzlement, minus all legal and forensic audit fees, which the partnership agreement assigns to the party found in breach. Claire set down a third document, the settlement terms. Rick's options, printed in 12-point font on 3 pages. Option 1. Accept the forced buyout at the adjusted valuation and sign a separation agreement today. Option 2. Decline, and we file a civil suit for embezzlement using the forensic report, the QuickBooks audit trail, and the vendor records as evidence. There is no option 3. Rick's eyes scanned the settlement terms. His hands shook. The manila folder with the Fairfield Commons specs slid off his lap and hit the floor. Nobody picked it up. Curt. His voice cracked on the single syllable. Curt, listen. We can work this out. We're brothers. 11 years. 11 years I've been in this office with you. There's context here you're not seeing. The invoices. Okay, maybe some of the entries got rounded up, but it's accounting, Curt. It's how the books work in the real world. $68,400 isn't rounding. I'm saying there's an explanation. If we just sit down, you and me, without all these... He gestured at the attorneys. We can figure this out. I reached for my phone, connected it to the conference room TV. Andrea's spreadsheet disappeared, and the security camera app took its place. The familiar grid of 6 thumbnail feeds, live from my house. I opened the archive, selected the compilation I'd assembled on the encrypted drive. 26 Tuesdays, edited into a chronological sequence. Driveway camera first. Rick's red F150 pulling in. Time-stamped, the magnetic company sign removed from the door. Front door camera. Rick walking to the entrance, checking the street before he opened the door. Then the basement cameras. The footage played on the same TV that had just displayed his doctored invoices. Same screen, same room. Same man, watching from the same chair. Rick's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. The footage cycled through August, September, October. His F150 in the driveway. The same house, the same basement. 26 arrivals, 26 departures. The timestamps running in the corner like a clock, counting down to 0. His voice broke. Curt, listen. There's context here. There's context you're not seeing. I've seen 6 months of context. 26 Tuesdays. Every one of them time-stamped, archived, and backed up to encrypted storage. I've had it for weeks. The compiled footage ended. The TV went dark. The conference room was silent, except for the HVAC system humming through the ceiling vents above us. Rick cycled through his inventory. The tools that had always worked. He leaned forward, hands spread on the table, the gesture of a man making a deal. Curt, come on. We built this company together, from nothing. You and me, right here in this room. I made mistakes. Big ones. I know that. But we can get past this. We can restructure, bring in an outside accountant, whatever you need. Don't throw away 11 years. I said nothing. His voice shifted. You're blowing this out of proportion. The money, okay, that's a conversation. But the other thing, that's personal. That's between people. You can't mix business and personal like this. It's not fair. Andrea Buckley looked at the whiteboard where the PNC joint account connected the personal to the business with a single red arrow. She didn't need to say anything. Rick's voice hardened. The mean streak surfaced. The undercurrent I'd caught in glimpses over 11 years, but never heard at full volume. You can't just take my company. I built this business. I brought in every major client we have. The Fairfield Commons deal, that's mine. The Henderson account, mine. Half the revenue in this building walks through the door because of me. The clients know my name, I said. They call for Curt Stavros. They tolerate you because you answer the phone. Rick's face shifted. The charm was gone. The deflection was gone. The threats were gone. What was left? was the thing Rick had spent 50 years covering, with handshakes and backslaps, and too loud laughing. You think you can run this business without me? You're a furnace repairman, Curt. That's all you've ever been. You crawl through attics and sweat through your shirt and come home smelling like duct sealant. I'm the one who made this company look like something. I'm the one who put us in rooms you'd never get into on your own. The words hung in the air. Claire Diaz wrote something on her legal pad. Marcus Webb watched Rick the way a man watches a fish fighting a hook it can't spit. I turned to Claire. We're done here. Claire slid the settlement papers across the table. 2 copies. Signature lines flagged with yellow tabs. Rick asked for a phone call. I gave him 20 minutes. He sat in the hallway with his cell phone, voice low, one hand over his mouth. His general practice attorney arrived 40 minutes later. A guy named Garrett from a 2-man firm in Kettering who handled Rick's personal taxes and had drafted his will. He walked in carrying a briefcase that looked older than he was, read the settlement terms and the forensic report in the conference room, while Rick sat in the hallway drinking water from a paper cup. Garrett came back out 12 minutes later, with the look of a man who'd just been told the building he was standing in had no foundation. He spoke to Rick in the hallway. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could read the body language. Garrett's hands open, palms down, calming, advising. Rick's head shaking, Garrett's head nodding. The universal choreography of a lawyer telling a client to take the deal because the alternative is worse. Rick signed at 3:27. Both copies. Blue ink on both signature lines. His hand shook enough that the second signature was different from the first. Claire witnessed, dated, and collected the documents. The forced buyout was executed. Stavros and Phelan Heating and Cooling no longer existed. The company that remained was mine. Rick stood up from the conference table. He picked up his Keurig coffee, which had gone cold an hour ago, looked at it, and set it back down. He picked up the manila folder with the Fairfield Commons specs from the floor. Held it for a moment. Set that down too. He didn't look at me on the way out. He walked through the warehouse bay door, car keys rattling against something metal in his pocket, his polo shirt untucked on one side where he'd been pulling at it during Andrea's presentation. The warehouse bay was full. Phil Dietrich and the 2 senior installers stood near the parts shelving, clipboards in hand, ostensibly doing inventory. They'd heard nothing through the soundproofed conference room walls, but they saw Rick's face. Gray, loose, the salesman's polish stripped down to bare metal. Phil caught my eye through the open doorway. Neither of us spoke. Phil nodded once, slow. The nod of a man who'd been watching from the parts counter for 15 years and had just seen the thing he'd been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it. Rick's F-150 started in the parking lot. The engine turned over, idled for 15 seconds, and pulled out. The tires caught asphalt. Route 35 traffic swallowed the sound. 3:29. The conference room was quiet. Marcus Webb opened his folder. Janine's been served at the house. The process server directed her here. He checked his watch. She should be arriving shortly. I sat back down. Andrea left the whiteboard presentation on the wall. The PNC joint account box with 2 names was still visible from the doorway. Claire organized the signed buyout documents into a manila folder and placed it in her briefcase. Marcus laid out the divorce filing and the financial disclosure documents. The settlement terms Janine's attorney would review. The security footage summary. We waited. Janine arrived at 3:51. I heard her car door slam in the parking lot. Heels on the warehouse bay concrete. Fast, clipped steps, the sound of a woman in a hurry who hasn't yet decided whether she's angry or scared. She came through the conference room door, already mid-sentence. Her voice pitched high, the way it got when she was constructing a defense before she knew what she was defending against. "Curt, I don't know what's going on, but a man showed up at the house with legal papers and I had to call Tammy to come stay with." She stopped. The room registered. 3 strangers at a conference table. Folders, a laptop, a whiteboard covered in arrows and account numbers. And there in the PNC box, her name in blue marker next to Rick's, the joint account she'd thought no one would find. Rick's chair pushed back from the table, empty, the Keurig coffee still sitting where he'd left it. His Fairfield Commons folder on the floor. Janine's hand went to her throat. The gold bracelet I'd never seen before 6 months ago caught the light. "He was just fixing our furnace," she said. "That's all. You're twisting everything." Nobody in the room responded. The sentence hung in the fluorescent air like exhaust from a blown gasket. Her eyes went to the whiteboard, to the arrows, to the account numbers, to her name in the box. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked at me. I looked at the thermostat on the conference room wall. A Honeywell programmable unit, same model as the one in our hallway at home. The digital display read 72 degrees. I said nothing. Marcus Webb stood and introduced himself. He walked Janine through the divorce filing with the same calm efficiency he'd used in his office 3 weeks ago. Janine's hands shook as she took the documents. She flipped through the pages without reading them, her eyes catching on numbers and legal terms she didn't understand. "This can't be legal," she said. "You can't just... We've been married for 19 years. I have rights." "You do," Marcus said, "and they'll be addressed in the settlement proceedings. But I'd recommend you retain your own counsel before we discuss specifics." Janine turned to me. Mascara had run from her left eye, a single dark line down her cheek. She looked at me the way she hadn't looked at me in years, with full attention, with the sudden realization that the man she'd stopped seeing was the same man who'd built the house, the business, the security system, and the case that was now sitting on the table between them. Curt. One word. My name. The way she used to say it when she meant it. I held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then I stood up, walked past her, through the warehouse bay, past Phil and the crew who had stopped pretending to do inventory, past the part shelves and the copper fittings and the break table, where Rick's morning coffee mug still sat in the sink. I walked to the parking lot, got in my truck, and drove home. The cul-de-sac was quiet. No red F150 in the driveway. The front door was locked. Inside, the house smelled the way it always smelled. The hallway thermostat read 72 degrees because the system I'd installed and maintained for 15 years was doing what it was designed to do. I walked downstairs to the basement workshop. The cedar paneling I'd tongue and grooved over 3 summers. The workbench bolted to the floor. The pegboard walls with every tool in its place. Danny's birdhouse, still on the workbench, still waiting for paint. I picked up the birdhouse, turned it over in my hands. The joints were tight. The roof pitch was correct. Danny had measured twice and cut once, the way I'd taught him. I set it back on the workbench and went upstairs. Made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table in the empty house and drank it while the furnace ran and the refrigerator cycled and the 6 cameras recorded an empty driveway, an empty basement, an empty backyard where 2 beehives sat in the October sun. The colonies inside them working the way colonies work. No wasted motion. Every member doing what it was supposed to do. The system functioning because the things that didn't belong had been removed. By 5 o'clock, the conference room at Route 35 was empty. The whiteboard paper had been pulled down and rolled up. The TV was off. Andrea's laptop was packed. The settlement documents were filed. Rick's Keurig coffee was cold in a paper cup on the table, and his Fairfield Commons folder was still on the floor where it had fallen from his lap when the first invoice appeared on screen. Phil Dietrich locked the warehouse bay at 5:15. Before he pulled the roll-down door, he walked to the conference room, picked up Rick's coffee cup, and threw it in the trash. Then he picked up the manila folder from the floor, looked at the Fairfield Commons specs inside, and set it on my desk. The dissolution of Stavros and Phelan and the dissolution of my marriage moved on parallel tracks over the following 8 weeks. I ran them the way I'd run a commercial installation, with 2 crews working different sections of the same building. Coordinated timeline. Shared resources. One project manager, making sure neither crew got in the other's way. Claire Diaz handled the business side. The forced buyout, triggered by Lois's co-signer standing under the fiduciary clause, required an independent valuation of the company's assets. Claire hired a third-party appraiser who spent a week in our books, our warehouse, our fleet inventory, our client contracts. The valuation came back at roughly $440,000 for the whole operation. Rick's 50% share, $220,000. Then the subtractions began. $68,400 in documented embezzlement, subtracted from Rick's share per the partnership agreement's restitution provision. Andrea Buckley's forensic audit fees, $14,200. Claire Diaz's legal fees for the dissolution, $9,800. The partnership agreement assigned all dispute-related costs to the malfeasant party. Rick had signed that provision in blue ink 11 years ago without reading it twice. His net payout landed somewhere around $128,000. Enough to cover his own attorney, Garrett from the 2-man firm in Kettering, and about 3 months of rent in a market where a 1-bedroom apartment ran $1,200 a month. Rick's attorney tried to contest the valuation. Garrett filed a motion arguing that the forced buyout undervalued certain client contracts and that the embezzlement figure was inflated by aggressive accounting methods. Andrea Buckley submitted her 47 exhibits with original vendor invoices side by side against QuickBooks entries, each discrepancy circled in red with the user log showing Rick's credentials on every entry. Garrett withdrew the motion 3 days later. There was nowhere to stand when the floor was made of your client's own keystrokes. The check cleared on a Thursday. Rick picked it up from Claire's office and never came back to Route 35. Word moved through the Dayton HVAC trade community, the way air moves through ductwork, followed the path of least resistance, and reached every room in the building. The supply house on Woodman Drive was first. I was picking up a condensing unit for a residential install, and Mark behind the counter said, "Heard about Rick." "That's rough, Curt." He didn't say what he'd heard. He didn't need to. I signed the invoice and loaded the unit into my truck. The carrier regional rep called me the following week. Not about pricing tiers, which was what Rick had claimed those Tuesday meetings were about, but to say that carrier wanted to continue the relationship with my company and that they'd adjust our account to reflect the single owner structure. The rep said he'd never met with Rick on a Tuesday. He said it in a way that suggested he wanted me to know he'd been asked and was setting the record straight. The train distributor said the same thing when I saw him at a trade show at the Dayton Convention Center in November. Rick told people he was meeting with us. He wasn't. Just want you to know. I knew. Within 3 weeks, the specifics had circulated through every supply house, trade show booth, and union hall in the metro area. The details shifted in the retelling. Some versions had the embezzlement at $100,000. Some had the affair lasting a year instead of 6 months. One version I heard secondhand from Phil claimed Rick had been running a second business on the side, using stolen materials. That one wasn't true. The truth was bad enough without embellishment. In a trade community built on handshake deals, Rick Phelan became a name people mentioned the way they mentioned a failed brand of compressor. Something that looked right on paper but couldn't hold pressure when it mattered. No HVAC company in the Dayton Metro would partner with him, hire him, or subcontract to him. His schmoozing skills, the one asset he'd brought to the partnership, required a room willing to listen. The rooms had closed. The red F 150 showed up in the parking lot of a Kettering apartment complex off Wilmington Pike, a one-bedroom unit on the second floor. I drove past it once, not looking for it, just taking the route to a service call. The truck was in a visitor spot. Whether he hadn't gotten a resident sticker or couldn't afford the deposit, I didn't ask. The magnetic Stavros and Phelan door sign was still on the driver's side. The company name that no longer included his. Every employee stayed with me. All 8 of them. Phil Dietrich, the 2 senior installers, the 3 journeymen, and both apprentices. There was no discussion, no vote, no meeting where I made a pitch. The Monday after Rick signed the buyout papers, the crew showed up at the Route 35 shop at their usual times, hung their jackets on their usual hooks, and went to work. Phil arrived at 7:15 with 2 coffees, set one on my desk, and said, "New sign guy called. He can have the door and the truck decals done by Friday." "What name?" "Stavros Heating and Cooling. Unless you want something different." "That works." Phil nodded and walked to the service truck. That was the entire transition meeting. The Fairfield Commons folder Rick had dropped on the conference room floor was still sitting on my desk where Phil had placed it. I opened it once, read the specs, and filed it in the active bids drawer. 42 units. We'd bid it ourselves. I brought in a part-time bookkeeper named Linda Novak, a retired accounts payable manager from a manufacturing company in Trotwood. She came in 3 days a week, reconciled the books against actual bank statements, and flagged anything that didn't match. I reviewed the accounts myself every month. Not because I didn't trust Linda, because trust had to be earned through verification, and verification had to be built into the system. The clients didn't notice a difference, or if they noticed an improvement. 3 regular customers mentioned to Phil that they were glad the other guy was gone. One of them, the veterinary clinic in Beaver Creek, sent a handwritten card thanking me for the years of reliable service and saying they looked forward to continuing with Stavros Heating and Cooling. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk next to Danny's 12-year-old photo with the multimeter. The business was leaner. 1 fewer salary, 1 fewer truck, 1 fewer Keurig machine pulling power in the front office. The overhead dropped. The revenue didn't. The margin improved by 11% in the first quarter after the dissolution, and that was before accounting for the $2,000 to $3,000 a month that had been draining through Rick's inflated invoices. Meg Phelan filed for divorce 3 days after the conference room meeting. Her attorney, a family law specialist in Centerville, used the forensic evidence I'd shared with Meg at the coffee shop as the foundation for the filing. Rick's diminished financial position made the proceedings shorter than they might have been. He had no leverage, no income, no business stake, no community standing to protect. Meg kept the house for the sake of her 2 daughters. Rick got weekend visitation and a child support order he'd struggled to meet. Meg and I spoke twice during that period. Once by phone, when she called to thank me for the referral to her attorney and to ask if Andrea's forensic report could be shared with her legal team. I authorized it through Claire. The second time was at a gas station on Far Hills Avenue. We were both fueling up on a Saturday morning. She was in sweats, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked tired, but not beaten. "There's a difference. How are you doing?" she asked. "Getting through it." "Me too." She replaced the gas nozzle. "The girls are asking about Uncle Curt and Aunt Janine. They don't understand why the families don't get together anymore. They'll understand when they need to." Meg nodded. She got in her car, waved once, and drove south on Far Hills. 2 people betrayed by the same man, standing across a concrete island between gas pumps. We didn't call it friendship. We didn't call it anything. It was just 2 people who knew the same truth and didn't need to explain it. Janine's divorce was different. She hired an attorney named David Keating, a family law practitioner from the east side of Dayton, known for aggressive filings and high billing rates. Keating's first move was a motion to dismiss the security footage as a violation of privacy. Marcus Webb responded with a single page citing Ohio's residential recording statute. Cameras on your own property, on a system you installed and maintained, recording in areas you own. No consent required. The judge denied the motion in 4 days. Keating's second move was to contest the financial disclosure, arguing that my business assets were being undervalued to minimize Janine's share of the marital estate. Claire Diaz submitted the independent valuation alongside Andrea's forensic report, showing that the company's actual value had been suppressed for 18 months by Rick's embezzlement that flowed into a joint account bearing Janine's name. The argument collapsed under its own arithmetic. Janine ran through her defenses the way Rick had cycled through his in the conference room, just spread over weeks instead of minutes. The first week, victimhood. Keating's filing included a declaration from Janine stating that she'd been emotionally neglected throughout the marriage, that I'd prioritized the business over the family, and that my long working hours had created a void she'd been forced to fill through other relationships. The word forced appeared 3 times. The second week, minimization. Keating filed a supplemental brief arguing that the affair was a brief lapse in judgment, not a pattern, and that the PNC joint account was opened at Rick's suggestion without Janine's full understanding of the funding source. The 6 months of Tuesday timestamps and the $22,000 balance suggested otherwise. The third week, blame shifting. Janine called me from her sister's number in Columbus, where she'd moved temporarily. I answered because I didn't recognize the area code. If you'd been home more, none of this would have happened. Your attorney should be making that argument, not you. I'm not making an argument. I'm telling you the truth. The truth is on a whiteboard in Andrea Buckley's office. She hung up. I blocked the Columbus number and texted Marcus Webb to note the contact for the file. Ohio's equitable distribution law doesn't require a 50-50 split. The court considers financial misconduct by either spouse. Andrea's documentation of the PNC joint account, funded by embezzled business income, constituted dissipation of marital assets. The legal term meant that Janine had participated in wasting shared financial resources through conduct the court recognized as wrongful. Marcus Webb laid it out for Keating in a settlement conference 4 weeks into the proceedings. The conference room at Marcus's office this time, not ours. I sat across from Janine for the first time since the Route 35 meeting. She looked different. The highlighted auburn hair had grown out at the roots. No acrylic nails. A plain sweater instead of the outfits that always cost more than she'd admit. Her hands stayed flat on the table, ringless. She'd stopped wearing her wedding ring the day she was served. Marcus presented the settlement terms. Janine would receive no alimony. She would retain her personal belongings, her vehicle, and her share of household furnishings, excluding anything I'd built by hand. She would assume responsibility for any debts connected to the PNC account. She would forfeit any claim to the business or my pension. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue a civil action for her participation in the dissipation of marital assets. Keating started to object. Marcus opened a folder and set the PNC signature card on the table. Then the security footage summary. Then Andrea's transaction report showing withdrawals from the joint account in Janine's name. The footage is admissible. The financial trail is documented. The forensic report has 47 exhibits. If this goes to trial, all of it enters the public record. Keating whispered something to Janine. She shook her head. He whispered again. She closed her eyes. Fine. 1 word. She signed the papers with a pen Marcus provided. Her hand was steady. The signature looked like her signature. Not the version on the PNC card, which had been bolder, written in the confidence of a woman who thought the account would never surface. This signature was smaller, tighter, the handwriting of a person who understood the document she was signing. Janine kept her holiday decorations, all 14 bins of Halloween, the color-coded inventory spreadsheet, the foam tombstones and fake cobwebs, and the skeleton she'd named Gerald that hung on the porch every October. She loaded them into a rented storage unit in Kettering, the metal door rolling shut on the last of what she'd curated in the house I'd built. Then she drove her Honda to Columbus, where her sister had a spare room. The affair, built on the thrill of secrecy and the fiction that Janine was the exciting center of someone's hidden world, did not survive exposure to daylight. Rick and Janine had no contact after the conference room. Whatever they'd shared in my basement every Tuesday for 6 months turned out to require the basement. Once the walls came off, there was nothing underneath. Danny took the news quiet. Internal. The anger going down into the foundation instead of up through the roof. I told him on a Sunday evening after Janine had moved to Columbus and the house was just the two of us. We sat at the kitchen table where we'd eaten 1,000 dinners. I gave him the version appropriate for a 16-year-old. His mother and I were divorcing. She'd been involved with Rick. Rick had also been stealing from the business, and none of it was Danny's fault. Danny listened with his hands folded on the table, the same posture I used when Andrea walked me through the forensic report. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator cycled. The furnace kicked on. The house sounds that had been background noise his entire life. Does Mom know you know? She does now. What happens to Rick? He's out of the company, out of our lives. Danny nodded. He unfolded his hands and looked at them. My hands, the same bone structure, the same wide palms, the same tendency to grip things when the mind was working through a problem. He's not Uncle Rick anymore, Danny said. No. Good. He got up from the table, went to his room, and closed the door. I heard the bed creak as he sat down. No television, no phone. Just a kid sitting in a quiet room, processing the fact that 2 of the adults he'd trusted had been lying to him for half a year. The next Saturday, Danny was in the service truck at 7:30 without being asked. He rode shotgun to a furnace replacement in Oakwood, handed me tools, held the flashlight in the crawl space, and didn't say a word about any of it. On the drive back, he asked about the company name change. Stavros Heating and Cooling? Yeah, sounds right. He turned the radio on. We listened to classic rock on the way back to the shop. He helped Phil unload copper pipe from the supply run and stayed until 5. 2 weeks later, I sat him down again. This time, about the money. The 529 plan. The $30,000 shortfall. I showed him the spreadsheet Andrea had prepared. 16 years of $300 monthly contributions. The projected balance. The actual balance. The gap mapped against Rick's embezzlement timeline. Danny studied the numbers the way he studied a circuit diagram, following the logic, tracing the cause. He stole from my college fund. Not directly. He stole from the business, which reduced my distributions, which reduced what I could contribute. The effect was the same. Danny set the spreadsheet on the table. We'll figure it out. 5 words. The most Stavros sentence I'd heard from anyone, including myself. Marcus Webb filed a civil claim against Rick for the $30,000 529 shortfall. The argument was straightforward. Rick's documented embezzlement of $68,400 from the business directly reduced the owner distributions that funded Danny's college advantage account. Andrea Buckley's analysis showed the correlation between reduced distributions and the account's underperformance against projections. An expert witness could testify to causation. Rick's attorney, Garrett, responded with a brief arguing that the 529 contributions were discretionary and that the shortfall could be attributed to market fluctuation. Andrea submitted a supplemental report isolating the market returns from the distribution reductions. The numbers didn't lie. They never do. The shortfall tracked against the skimming with a 94% correlation. Garrett called Marcus 2 weeks before the hearing date. Rick would settle. The forensic evidence made trial a losing proposition, and Rick's remaining funds from the buyout check were disappearing into rent, legal fees, and a life that cost more when you couldn't steal to subsidize it. The settlement restored $30,000 to Danny's College Advantage account. Rick paid it from what remained of his diminishing buyout proceeds, money that was running out faster than he'd planned now that every dollar had to be earned or accounted for. The amount wasn't about the money. The amount was about the principle that you don't take from a kid's future and walk away without the bill coming due. The Monday after the 529 settlement cleared, Danny checked the account balance on the kitchen computer. He looked at the number, looked at me. It's back. Close enough. He logged out and went downstairs to the workshop. I heard the sound of sandpaper on wood, the birdhouse. He was finishing it. Rick Phelan landed where gravity takes men who've spent their lives borrowing altitude from other people's work. The one-bedroom apartment in Kettering. A parking spot for the red F-150 he could no longer afford to maintain. The truck sat in the lot, with the Stavros and Phelan magnetic sign still on the driver's side door. He never removed it. Whether that was denial or inertia or some private memorial to the life he'd lost, I didn't know and didn't care. He applied at 3 HVAC companies in the Dayton Metro during the months following the dissolution. All 3 declined. Word had reached every shop in the area. A man who steals from his own partner and sleeps with his partner's wife doesn't get hired in a trade where the crew trusts each other with their lives on rooftops and in confined spaces. Rick's resume, such as it was, listed 11 years of experience as a co-owner. But co-owner of what? The technical work was mine. The installations were mine. The client relationships, the real ones built on competence and follow-through, were mine. Rick had owned the phone manner and the handshake. Nobody was hiring a handshake. He expanded his search outside the HVAC trade. Applied for sales positions at a car dealership on North Main, at a commercial real estate office in Centerville, at a home improvement store that needed an outside sales representative. I heard about the applications through the network, the same supply house and trade show pipeline that had carried the original story. None of the applications went anywhere. Rick Phelan's name carried weight in the trade. The kind of weight that doesn't show up in a search engine, but follows you into every interview. Phil told me he'd seen Rick at a gas station on Wilmington Pike. Standing at the pump, polo shirt untucked, the chunky watch still on his wrist. He didn't see Phil. Or if he did, he pretended not to. He looked like a man sitting in what he did, Phil said. I thought about Rick's Civil War speeches. Antietam. 23,000 casualties in 12 hours. Both armies sitting across from each other the next morning, looking at what they'd done. Rick had talked about those soldiers with real passion, real understanding. The only genuine thing about him, his love for the history of men who went too far to back down. Now he was living it. Every employee at Stavros, heating and cooling, had chosen to stay. All 8 of them, without a meeting, without a pitch, without a single conversation about loyalty or sides. They chose by showing up, by hanging their jackets on the same hooks, driving the same trucks, running the same routes. The work didn't change because the work had always been about the technician on site, not the man answering the phone. The clients confirmed it. Revenue held, then grew. The company that Rick had claimed to build, the clients he'd said walked through the door because of him, didn't notice he was gone. The math had a precision that Andrea Buckley would have appreciated. Rick spent 11 years taking 50% of everything I built. 11 years of equal distributions on unequal labor. The salary, the draws, the benefits, the truck, the Keurig coffee, all of it flowing to a man whose primary contribution was being in the room. Add the $68,400 in embezzlement on top of a decade of 50-50 splits on work he didn't do, and the real cost of Rick Phelan was something no forensic report could fully calculate. He left with a fraction of what he'd taken and no way to earn more in the industry that had been his only credential. When winter approaches and resources tighten, the workers expel the drones. No negotiation, no second chances. Rick Phelan sat in a one-bedroom apartment in Kettering with a bookshelf of Civil War histories, a red truck with someone else's company name on the door, and nobody left to lecture about Pickett's charge. Still invested? Hit like and rate my story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Tell me why. I read them all. 6 months after the dissolution. Late spring in Centerville. The kind of May morning where the air smells like cut grass and warm soil, and the light comes through the backyard maples at an angle that makes everything look new. I stood at the East Hive in my bee suit, with the smoker in one hand and the hive tool in the other. The colony had come through winter strong. I pulled the first frame and held it up to the light. Both sides packed with capped brood, the pattern tight and regular, a queen laying with precision. The second frame was heavier. Capped honey, clover, and early wildflower. The wax, a pale gold that caught the sun. Danny stood next to me in the suit he'd worn since he was 9. Ankles, 2 inches short. Veil patched with duct tape 3 seasons running. He held the smoker while I worked the frames, keeping the puffs short and low the way I'd taught him. "This one's full," I said, handing him the honey frame. "Set it in the super." He took it with both hands, fingers steady under the weight. 16 years old and already reading the hive without being told what to look for. He spotted a queen cell on the 3rd frame before I did. Peanut-shaped cap on the bottom bar. Swarm cell or supersedure. I looked at the placement. Bottom of the frame, facing down. Swarm. She's thinking about splitting. Do we let her? We give her room. Add another brood box next week. If she still wants to go, we catch the swarm and start the 3rd hive. Danny nodded. The 3rd hive had been his idea. He picked out the box from a catalog over Christmas break and assembled it in the basement workshop on a Saturday afternoon while I replaced the zone valve on a residential job in Oakwood. When I came home, the box was built, the frames wired, the foundation sheets pressed in. He hadn't asked for help. The joints were tight. The basement workshop was the same room it had been before everything. Same cedar paneling. Same workbench bolted to the floor. Same pegboard walls with every tool in its assigned position. I hadn't torn anything out. Hadn't replaced the paneling or moved the workbench or changed the layout. I built that room. The work was good. The room was good. What other people did in it didn't change the quality of the construction. Danny's birdhouse sat on a shelf above the workbench, painted blue, the color he'd chosen from a sample card at the hardware store. The roof pitch was correct. The entry hole was the right diameter for wrens. He'd measured twice and cut once. Stavros Heating and Cooling was running its first full spring season under the new name. The Route 35 office had new signage that Phil Dietrich had overseen while I was on a service call. White background, blue lettering, the company phone number in a font large enough to read from the road. The fleet trucks had matching decals. Phil had negotiated a group rate with the sign company without being asked. Phil had stepped into an operations role that didn't exist on paper, but existed in practice. He handled dispatch, scheduling, and crew assignments the way he handled everything else. Without asking permission and without complaint, he still grumbled. He'd always grumble. But the grumbling now was about late deliveries and apprentice mistakes, not about a co-owner who vanished every Tuesday. The shop ran clean. Linda Novak, the part-time bookkeeper, came in Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. She reconciled every bank statement against the QuickBooks entries and flagged discrepancies at the $10 level. I reviewed the accounts on the 1st of every month. sat at my metal desk in the warehouse bay with a cup of coffee and the printouts, and went through each line. The revenue held and then grew. 2 new commercial contracts in the first quarter, both from referrals. One from the veterinary clinic in Beaver Creek, which recommended us to a dental practice, expanding into a second location. The other from a property management company. 42 units, full HVAC overhaul. We bid Fairfield Commons ourselves and landed the contract 3 weeks later. Phil ran the crew. I designed the system layout. Danny helped with the ductwork measurements on a Saturday, holding the laser measure while I sketched the floor plans. Lois came to Sunday dinners at the house. She brought walnut bread and opinions about the Bengals. She sat at the head of the kitchen table, the way she'd sat there since my father died. Same posture, same authority. She ate the roast chicken I'd made from her recipe and told Danny about his grandfather's shop on Wayne Avenue, the customers who came back for 30 years because Dimitri Stavros did the work right the first time. Danny listened the way I'd listened, taking it in without performing attention. Building something internal from the stories of a man he'd never met, but whose hands he'd inherited. The East Hive was heavy. I pulled the last frame, checked the brood pattern one more time, and closed the box. Danny set the smoker down and pulled off his gloves. His hands were calloused at the palms from the copper pipe and conduit he'd been handling on weekend jobs. 16 years old, with a working man's hands and a college fund that was back where it belonged. I carried the honey frames to the garage workshop and set them on the extraction table I'd built from scrap lumber and a food-grade stainless steel drum. The extractor was manual, a hand-crank centrifuge that spun the honey out of the comb without destroying the wax. Slow work. Patient work. The kind of work that can't be rushed without ruining the product. The mason jars were lined up on the kitchen counter, clean, labeled, ready. I'd printed new labels that winter on the home computer. Stavros honey. Hive and harvest date written by hand below the printed text. Clover and wildflower. The 2 varieties the East Hive produced, depending on what was blooming in the fields south of Centerville. Every fall, I'd fill the jars and give them away. To clients, to Phil and the crew, to neighbors on the cul-de-sac, to Linda at the office, to Lois. The jars were small. The honey was good. People kept them on their kitchen counters long after the honey was gone, using them for pencils or loose change. I uncapped the first frame with a heated knife. The wax falling away in clean sheets. The smell of warm beeswax filled the garage, sweet and heavy, the way it always smelled at extraction. I loaded the frame into the extractor and turned the crank. The honey pooled at the bottom of the drum, thick and gold, catching the garage light through the stainless steel mesh of the filter screen. Danny came in and watched from the doorway. How many jars this year? If the West Hive produces, like last season, maybe 40. Enough for the Fairfield Commons crew? Should be. He leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching the crank turn, the honey spiral down. The same posture I'd held watching my father work in the shop on Wayne Avenue 30 years ago. Standing in the doorway, learning the rhythm, not asking to be taught because the teaching was in the watching. The foragers bring in the nectar. The guard bees check every arrival and remove what doesn't belong. I turned the crank. The honey ran clean,